right? So the next thing is that ER diagram. So unit 1, you'll also study about how to represent a real world system by means of an ER diagram. So what do you mean by an entity? So in ER diagram, an entity is an object of interest in a system which may have a physical or logical existence, right? So an entity is an object of interest in a system that may have a physical or logical existence. So basically for any database design, we go for this ER model, right? So it will be pictorially representing any database schema designed by means of this ER diagram. So basically the important components in an ER diagram is going to be entity, attributes, and relationship. So what do you mean by entity? Is an object of interest in a system that is distinguishable from other objects. It may have a physical existence or a logical existence, right? So for example, in a university like us, student is an entity, faculty is an entity, department is an entity, right? So an entity is an object of interest in a system. An entity is described by a set of attributes, right? So for example, a department entity is described by a set of attributes, namely department name, building, and budget, right? So the entities are best described by a set of attributes. So here we have represented two entities by means of a relationship, right? So you have instructor entity. So the instructor entity has attributes ID, instructor ID, name of the instructor, salary, right? So the underline sign in an attribute indicates that it's a primary key, right? So instructor ID is the primary key. So a collection of entities of the same type, it's known as entity set, right? So whenever we have an instructor entity set, it means that it's a collection of entities of the same type. So instructor entity is described by the attributes ID, name, and salary. Similarly, department entity set, right? Department entity set is it is being described by a set of attributes: department name, building, and budget. So the attribute department name is underlined, which means that it's going to be the primary attribute or primary key in that particular relation. And there exists a relationship among the several entities, right? So an instructor is a member of your department, right? So there exists a relationship among the several entities. There exists one-to-one relationship among the participating entities, or 1 to n among the participating entities, or n to 1 relationship between the participating entities, or m to n relationship among the participating entities. So here there exists a 1 to n relationship between the department and instructor, right? So we have one department, so we have n number of instructors associated with the department. So there exists 1 to n relationship between the department and the instructor, right? So this is how we define an ER diagram. We'll study ER diagram separately as a separate topic, like it's an essay type question. Initially we'll be representing an a real-time system by means of an ER diagram. We'll study how to represent an ER diagram, and then we'll study about how to reduce the ER diagram into a set of relations, how to represent a strong entity set. So strong entity set means an entity set with a primary key is known as strong entity set. So for example, here instructor has a primary key ID, and similarly department entity has a primary key, a department name, right? So we'll study how to represent a strong entity set by means of a relation, how to represent weak entity by means of a relation. So an entity set without any primary key is known as weak entity, right? So the difference between strong entity set and weak entity set is that strong entity set contains a primary key, right? An entity set with a primary key is known as strong entity set, whereas an entity set without a primary key is known as a weak entity set. So there exists a relationship between the participating entities, right? So here member, right? So instructor is a member of department. So there exists some relationship between the participating entities, and we need to know how to represent a relationship set in an ER diagram, right? So we'll discuss in our later classes. So as of now, since it's an introduction chapter 1, so you need to know a database is described by means of an ER diagram, right? The schema can be pictorially represented by means of an ER diagram, where entity represents an object of interest in a system which may have a physical or logical existence, and attributes are used to describe the entities, and there exists a relationship between the participating entities, right? So this is about introduction to ER diagram. We'll briefly discuss ER diagram for a period of time, right? So the overall logical structure of the database can be expressed graphically by means of an ER diagram, entity relationship diagram, right? So the logical structure is best described by logical structure of a database is best described by an entity relationship diagram, also called as ER diagram. There are several ways to draw this diagram. So one of the most popular method is used to is like using a unified modeling language, right? So you have UML language. So some softwares like rational rows, which are popular tools for drawing ER diagram, entity relationship diagram, right? So the next